Welcome to the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce East Area Council's office after hours. And I am Mike Coffey, president of Imperative Information Group. And this is an ongoing series of conversations around the issues of diversity, and especially in the workplace, and how we can have better conversations around those issues that have been top of mind and in the media. But how do we create, as business leaders, environments that are inclusive and respectful and equitable? Today, our focus is primarily going to be around tools that companies can use to have those conversations, because we get a little liver quiver when we start to talk about some of these issues with our employees, and we're not sure how to do it in a way that's respectful, isn't going to cause offense. And so today, our panelists are some real subject matter experts. I'm strictly here to moderate, and they're going to share about things that they've done with employers or in their own workplaces to have these conversations, and with the ultimate goal. Well, I'll let them tell you what the ultimate goals are. So, Dion, will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Ken. Hi, my name is Dion Harrison, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for Elevate, which is a fintech company that is based out of the Fort Worth, Texas area. We actually build technology solutions for banking institutions, and hopefully those solutions help customers that are in the banking industry attempting to try to find or identify products that will help them get through short-term situations. And we are trying to be help our banking institutions be responsible lenders. My particular position at Elevate is focused on not only identifying ways that we can use diversity to enhance the solutions that we have, but really promoting diversity and inclusion within our institutions, so that we can make sure that our employees feel comfortable with kind of bringing themselves forward, and also to help them to take their experiences and their background and lend that expertise and that talent towards creating new solutions for us.
Thank you. Adina, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Adina Citron Walker. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I work at the Multicultural Alliance, and I'm the Vice President of Programs. I have a background in intergroup dialogue, and at the Multicultural Alliance, our mission is to promote inclusive communities. We work with various groups of people, bringing people of different backgrounds together for conversation, connection, and dialogue. And ultimately, we also work to eliminate bias, bigotry, and oppression. The idea is that once we've brought people together for conversations, that bias, bigotry, and oppression will also be diminished as a result of those conversations.
Jared, would you introduce yourself to the participants?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Jared Williams, and I work with Leadership ISD. Our work is centered as a nonprofit and nonpartisan nonprofit around equipping community leaders to elevate our public schools by advancing both racial equity and academic excellence within our neighborhood schools. That work looks like lots of conversations in the community. That work looks like mobilizing and educating folks to make a plan to vote. That also looks like equipping our governing school boards on how to create conditions within school districts to ultimately see the kinds of student outcomes that we want to see for all of our students. And it also looks like ensuring that we have local policies and also statewide policies that really ensure the very best in our schools and in our school communities. So glad to be here and glad to be a part of this conversation.
And thank you all to our panelists for being here and giving your time in preparation for this. So let's start with a basic question. Jared, let's start with you. Why are these conversations important to even have in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that ultimately it's centered around how do we generate outcomes for every family and every student in our school systems, particularly around schools, but this could apply in business settings as well. And I think that that change starts at three levels. One, at the personal level, because we bring our histories and our heritage and our lived experiences to the places in which we show up. It also happens professionally in the jobs that we want to execute. We bring those same histories. And also organizationally, we're made up of people from all kinds of walks of life and backgrounds. And it's important that we create conditions in all of those spaces where, one, we know the very best in ourselves, and also we're able to create and build muscles to have important conversations about ourselves that ultimately lead to storytelling that ultimately leads to transformation in the kinds of outcomes that we want to see in our businesses and our nonprofits and our school system. So the conversation is very important because we're, human beings, and it's important to center humanity in this work to get to the kinds of outcomes we want to see.
But Adina, I was always taught we're not supposed to talk about religion and politics at work. What's changed?
I'm laughing about that because for those of you who don't know, I did not grow up in Texas. And when I first moved to Texas, I met an individual and the words out of her mouth said, you know, Adina, I like you. So let's just not talk about politics or religion, which was my welcome to Texas conversation. What has changed? There's a lot that has changed. So with the continued police shootings of unarmed people of color, especially Black people, and a year that's amplified discussions on race and equality, these kinds of conversations that were once deemed conversational are now on the rise. And I believe that they're actually happening, whether or not they're happening from an organizational standpoint. Conversations are happening on a one-on-one level in some cases. And the other thing about this is that if I asked you to create a list of all of the essence of who you are, all your identities, all the characteristics, all of what makes you who you are, and then I said, okay, now you need to cross that list and put only 5 things on it. Or if your list was 5, narrow it down to 3. So what we've been doing, a lot of our workplaces, not all, but some of our workplaces, have been erasing people's identities by not being able to have conversations that are very meaningful and deep related to their own religion and or politics or any other identities that we all may be experiencing.
Well, so if we step into that, into those conversations, there's some risk, I guess, of having hurt feelings or alienating somebody or saying the wrong thing. But at Elevate, what have been the benefits of having these kind of conversations?
Honestly, I believe that there's a lot of benefits to actually engaging in that conversation. I think you do more harm by not having the conversation because you don't allow yourself to learn from the experience, and you don't allow yourself to the opportunity to really express empathy or even in some cases get empathy from other people when you share your own. If we kind of take a step back from issues and just think about other benefits that come out of having open conversations and open dialogues about different backgrounds and people understanding kind of who you are, where you're at. I mean, you actually have seen some tangible successes, not just with Elevate, but with other companies. I mean, the concept of working from home, working parents, and having virtual technology in order to accommodate that, right? Paternity leave in addition to maternity leave, having time off for the adoption of a child. I mean, all of those are things that, quite honestly, corporate America has not always been very considerate of, but we have engaged in some tough conversations all over the years that have been sporadic across different organizations. And those types of benefits that are now considered benefits to an employee are the tangible outcomes of having these types of conversations. So I would encourage everyone to at least understand that there's diversity is more than just the color of someone's skin and their ethnicity and their background, but there are all different types of diversities that you have to engage with that might be tough subjects sometimes. And the risk, I think the reward that you get out of it really outweighs any type of risk that you think might be there. It's more of a perception. I think if you're going to be in a people business, you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable a little bit, but engage in those conversations in the right way and with the right intent, so that you can make the other person feel comfortable about talking to you so that you can learn. But I am a big proponent of having the conversation because there are some very tangible things that can come out of that.
Yesterday, you were talking about, when we were discussing this, about how some of your products were affected when you started asking the right questions. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. We at Elevate, we do a lot of focus groups with our customers. In fact, I think we've gotten part of our success is rooted in the fact that we actually take time to speak to lots and lots and lots of customers before we actually put a product into the market. And a part of that of putting those focus groups together, we look at a lot of different things: geography, background, socioeconomic factors, and just the diversity of all of those groups helps us to better understand what certain people might be going through, and even what their different financial situations are and how they manage their money. And for years, there's been this perception that poor people are financially illiterate. And I can tell you, just based off of the years that I've been in this industry and the different focus groups that I've been in, that simply is not true. Poor people are not financially illiterate. They just have a series of circumstances that generally hurt them in the situation, and they end up going into these spirals, right? But we as corporate America don't understand that if we don't take the time to actually listen and engage with our customers, and especially listening and engaging with customers from a variety of different types of backgrounds and experiences. So I think that we've been able to create a lot of flexibility in our products. We've been able to even take mainstream products that are out in the market today and just tweak them based on the customer situation, just so that we can better accommodate where they're at, when they're there, and then give them the flexibility that they need so that we can make it a positive experience for them. There's a lot of innovation that has come out of that, from an underwriting perspective, from a product features perspective, and we've been able to really hone what is the most valuable product that we can actually bring to our customers based off of the experience that they talk about. But we have to understand that this is a people product, and that it is a product that people use for their lives. And we have to be considerate of that, and be open to listening, and also be humble enough to say that we need to change as a result of what they need to do with these products for their lives.
Jared, in your environment, Leadership ISD, what are you guys, as you have these conversations and spark these conversations among leaders in your constituent groups, what are y'all hoping the outcome will be of those conversations?
Yeah, it's similar to Dion. We do our own set of focus groups, and we call them listening circles. And we think that before creating policy transformation, we have to really understand the values and the issues of the people that we're serving. And so in that process, we use a tool that we call the 3 C's, which is really a way of identifying what perspectives are missing at the table. And so we define the 3 C's as color, culture, and consciousness. And so racially, what does the table look like, and whose perspective are we missing? Culturally, what perspectives at the table and what perspective is missing? And lastly, consciousness, what perspectives around these important issues are we missing, and what perspectives are at the table? We also use that tool inwardly as an organization, as we're hiring and as we're promoting, and all of those ultimately work together to ensure that we're having what we call multiple perspectives around decision making that really create a plan that's informed by the people that are being served both within the organization and also within our service delivery and our scope of work with our nonprofits. So I think that it's a wonderful tool to ensure that we're missing perspectives. But the reality is that in this work, as we continue to engage with the folks that we're serving both internally and externally, there's perspectives that we miss. And so this is more of a journey than like a destination. So it's important that we're constantly asking ourselves in every conversation, what perspective was not here, and how do we continue to ensure that we're working to make sure that perspective is ultimately at the table. So that's ultimately the outcome in and of itself. Is we think that multiple perspectives drive an informed decision that creates better outcomes.
And so I've spent my career in the HR world, and I've talked to a lot of people, execs over the years, especially in business owners, who have resisted the idea of simply counting noses, if you will, just saying, okay, we've got X number of people of this group and this group and this group, so we're, our affirmative action plan's done, we're good, we can move on. But they don't see the value in that. And you're talking about going beyond just phenotypic traits and looking deeper into culture. You said culture and consciousness. And so can you talk about what consciousness means to you when you're talking about that?
Yeah, as an organization, we hone in on racial equity. And so we talk about racial consciousness and really understanding who we are as individuals, the way we show up into this work, understanding our cultural history and our racial identity is an important part in serving a community that's equally racial diverse. Representation absolutely matters, but also consciousness and how we interact with folks from the same race, from different races, is an important conversation to have and an important muscle to build. I think that when we build that muscle, we also find humanity and grace in order to have conversations about other identities as well that intersect our racial identities. And so I think that the consciousness journey is something that's rooted in our lived experience and in our humanity. And we're all constantly evolving and growing. And so this is a culture that we really lean on to create a spirit and a culture of not just inclusivity, but ultimately a culture that, we would say is anti-racist, that we're like actively pursuing our blind spots in ways that ultimately create healing in our organization and in our community, that ultimately leads to the kind of transformation that leads to positive and very strong outcomes in our communities and in the folks that we're serving.
Adina, at the Multicultural Alliance, y'all do a lot of work in that area, and helping employers have these conversations and understanding this, this broader view of individuals. And so it's not just strictly identitarian politics. It's more about people being whole people and understanding that. But how to say this? If we're gonna have those conversations, I think we talked about consciousness, and I think Jared said we kind of avoided these conversations, and I think one reason a lot of business leaders have avoided the conversations is because they don't want to step into it. They don't want. It's not that they don't want to have a positive workplace, have people feel included, and all of that, but just we've all seen the Office episodes, right? Where the leader steps into it and just comes out looking like a dope or worse, offending somebody, and nobody wants to do that. So how do we have these conversations with some level of competency?
Well, some of it takes practice, and even if you've done it over and over again and exercising that muscle, we, meaning I, still make mistakes. And so the question is, how do I learn from those mistakes through that process? And part of what I would say to that, and again, I'll give a couple tools, is that conflict in the workplace is inevitable. It happens. And so when there's lack of acceptance and respect among employees, there's conflicts are going to arise anyway. But however, when there's mutual respect, it reduces the likelihood of conflict and unites people. And that's where developing cultural awareness and having these conversations is really, really key. So there's a lot of different potential tools. So for someone who's a leader, if this is the first time that you've thought about jumping into this, there's a couple things that I would suggest. and these are things that I continue to do now also, is first of all, figure out what your own hot buttons are. So what are the things that are said or potential emotions that may happen that make you not be able to be your complete authentic self, where you can be in the present moment, really listening and hearing somebody. So as someone who's a facilitator, if your hot button is going, you're not as conscious in your facilitation process as you might be, and it won't be as productive. So identify those hot buttons. My other suggestion is always great, if you can, to do a co-facilitation lead. And when people co-facilitate together, then means if my hot button is going and it's a new hot button that I didn't realize I had, that my relationship with my co-facilitator knows that that's happening, and we can support one another through those processes and unpack it a little bit later. Another example is the idea of focusing on dialogue and debate. I mentioned earlier, I have a background on intergroup dialogue. And for me, that was astronomically life-changing. And the difference between debate, so when we think about debate, I'm used to working with people who respond, a back and forth conversation here. So I'm going to ask hypothetical questions. So when you think about debate, think about what comes to your mind. When I do this, people usually say winning, trying to persuade someone, trying to pinpoint and listen with the idea of saying, what am I going to point out that's wrong in what you're saying? So when you think about that from a dialogue perspective, dialogue is very different from debate. Dialogue is about listening for understanding. Dialogue is about a win-win. Dialogue is not about fixing an issue. So my suggestion would be to start from a frame of dialogue. And instead of saying from a debate conflict or I'm right, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with what you say, do it with the framework of dialogue with the idea of listening to understand. And there's a lot more about dialogue that I can go into, but those are some of the thought processes. And the other suggestion I would say is lean into your uncomfortableness. We work with people and employers that are uncomfortable every day in the work life because of their lived experiences or skin or identities that they're a part of. It is a privilege for all of us to be in a workplace where we're comfortable all the time. So for us, it's really important to lean into those uncomfortablenesses so we can continue to have these conversations.
That's great. If we're going to have these conversations, and let's say I'm an organization leader, and I'm thinking about, let's try to do this. How do I measure the success? Is it just the fact that the building didn't get burned down at the end of the conversation, or is there something else there to know how we did? Was this fruitful and meaningful?
So every organization is going to have a different level of success. So for some people that will be, yay, the building didn't burn down. For other individuals, you will probably notice that there's a connection that's happening that's a little different. So a couple of weeks ago, the Multicultural Alliance did a program with an organization, and people sat down and had worked with each other for years. And because we were talking about issues of identity, which isn't always talked about, and we talked about it from a personal storytelling experience, people learned things about one another that they had never known. And they had sat in an office with each other for over 10 years. So the culture will shift a little bit. And so you're asking for measurables. That's a really good question. Dion might have a good idea about what measurables have come from his experience, but some of it is the ability to empathize with one another. Some of it's the ability to care for one another. Some of it's the ability to understand. The other thing is people become more productive in work. And that's a measurable, and also retention rate is a measurable one also. And it's not a one-time thing. It's not a one and done. Okay, we had that conversation about identity. Check it off the box. It is a continual process.
Yeah, I agree with that, Adina. I mean, every time that you have a new person that comes into your organization, you start all over again, right? And I think you do have to be conscious of the fact that those moments are going to be constant for you. But in terms of measurable successes, I would say that who are you attracting? who's attracted to your company to come and work for you, and how broad of a spectrum are the people that are coming and wanting to work with your company. How well does your brand sit in the marketplace, even if it is in a very niche market for yourself or for your industry? How well does it sit? I mean, there's got to be a comparative, right? There's very few of us that actually have no competitors at all. We like to think that we're very, very unique here at Elevate also, but I know that we definitely have some competitors. I also think that, to Adina's point, retention is definitely a huge one. Do people want to stay with you, and do people want to help promote your company? How innovative is your company? Are you coming up with new products? Are you building on your profitability because you are promoting a diversity of thought and allowing people to have a voice at the table? Is your leadership, do you have a succession plan? Do you have senior leaders that can leave and still have people that are available in order to step into those roles and be competent and confident in doing so? And I think those are all very measurable things that you can look at. And it's not necessarily on a sheet of paper all the time. Some of them are. Profitability is definitely one of those, right? But they're building blocks, right? Just like diversity and equity and inclusion are all building blocks to having better relationships. The steps that you take in order to create that type of an environment is also a building block to your company having greater profitability and greater retention and greater attraction for new employees that might be coming in and seeing that. So I think that there are lots of ways that you can measure that return, but you have to look at your own individual business and figure out what is it that where are you? Do you have an issue with anything in particular? And if you don't have an issue, then great. What's going to help you to grow, right? Because there are elite athletes out there who still train every single day. I mean, Michael Jordan was an elite athlete. He still trained every day. So what can your company do to get better every single day? Don't ever get complacent that you are that great, because just like we understand, or I should say, let me take a step back. I came to an understanding, a kind of an epiphany, when we started our LGBTQ network at Elevate. And as we were forming that employee network, one of the things that one of our employees said to me is that I have to come out every day. And I didn't understand what that concept actually meant. But I have a sister who identifies as being lesbian. And I went and I actually talked to her about that. And I said, what does that mean to you when this person said to me, I have to come out every single day? And she said, what it really means is that it's not just, I don't have a moment when I come out. I do it. I have sometimes a big moment when I come out to somebody that I really care about. But every time I meet a new manager or or I go to a new job, or a new employee starts, or if we do an event outside of here and I'm a representative for this company, there's a part of me that has to come out or expose myself or hide myself in some way. And there's this constant flow of that happening over and over and over again. It's a daily thing. And the same thing actually translates to your company. The reality is that diversity, equity, inclusion, all in these topics, these issues, it's so complex and so multifaceted, but it's because it's a people business and it's a people issue. And you're constantly having to look internally at yourself. And what is it that is going to help me to create the type of inclusive environment that's going to make all of my employees feel comfortable with bringing themselves forward, with coming out, with being, their whole self, so that we can take advantage of all of those things and capitalize on those things together, right? And if a lot of our companies always want to use the term family very loosely, right? Like we're the Elevate family, and we believe that, but we believe that because we're truly trying to promote an inclusive environment that is very accepting of people from all different types of backgrounds and so forth. And I think by doing so, we have become a much more innovative and much more creative company, but we still got a long way to go. And that journey never really stops. And I'm actually excited about what we can learn more. And it gives me the idea that we have a lot more growth that we can have with our company, no matter where we're at.
Yeah,
Jared,
I would add
Leadership
into that.
ID, talk about what your stakeholders are, I guess your ultimate stakeholders in your mission are students and families, but how do y'all measure success? How do you know if the implementation of your programs are successful?
Yeah, I think Adina and Dion hit on several of the ultimate outcomes that we're looking for. Another one that they touched on that I'd also like to highlight is that personal component. I think that speaking my truth and using my I statements, me as a leader, I've developed an outcome of reflective leadership, and I've seen my personal growth over that. Right. So as a Black man leading a team of two, one Afro-Latina and also another who is Mexican American. I've recognized even my blind spots in leadership and in creating room for emerging leaders to also lead. And so I've had to ask myself, in many occasions, is this, a function of my leadership, or is this a function of, other intersectionalities of blind spots for me? And my teammate, I've given them 100% autonomy and authority to call me out when biases show up, even in my own personal leadership. And so I think that for me, one of the measures that we look at is our reflective leadership and then our ability to use tools that we've developed as an organization to navigate those difficult conversations when we might have hit that hot button, as Adina said. We call it triggers, where we may have triggered a colleague or may have triggered a family that we're working with. And so I think that personal growth is an important outcome that then allows for me as a Black male to show up in my full self. We were talking about this yesterday. One thing that has emerged for me in this pandemic is that I no longer am able to switch from professional to personal to everything in between, because my office is also my home, and those two have collided in a way that you would not believe. And so that's also something that we as an organization have been working through, is how do we continue to create conditions where we can bring our whole selves to the work. And yeah, that does drive productivity, so that affects our professional beings. I mean, ultimately that helps us to create lasting relationships in that brand in the community that is really felt as authentic by the folks that we serve, and that ultimately helps us to get a lot further along on our key measures because of that culture of just really holding each other accountable to be our best selves. I mean, also that culture that equity is not a destination, that it's indeed a journey, and that every day we're asking ourselves, how do we continue to provide the very best space for people to show up authentically and also to show up as the best versions of themselves, which is their whole selves. And so that personal piece is really important for us.
You said these
Mike,
weren't one-time. Did you have something, Dion?
Yeah, Mike, I just wanted to piggyback on something that Jared said, because I think he hit something, a benefit that is kind of understated in our comments right now. But the benefit to the community is huge. I mean, the reality is that we all, to some degree, whether it's small business or big business, we all want to be able to give back to our community in some way. And by engaging in some of these conversations with your employees, I think a lot of times you start to uncover a lot of things that people care about. And I'll say, as an example for myself, I have been a part of an organization called Tango Tab that has fostered great relationships with restaurants and charitable organizations around the city of the DFW area, to be able to provide food resources to local charitable organizations that pass out food to people 365 days a year. And I really have cared about that a lot. And my boss, not long ago, about a couple of years ago, I just kind of leaned into that a little bit and said, why do you do this? And what's important to you about that? And why have you never told anyone that you've been working on this in this endeavor? And it took me back for a second, and I really thought. I was like, well, I didn't think anybody cared, right? And he was like, you don't think we care about hunger? Like, you don't think we care about like, and so I missed an opportunity personally to be able to share that, right? But it was really interesting because as soon as I started to share that, then I started getting other employees that would come to me and ask me questions about how can I get involved, and can we host an event here at work? And I was able to be very fortunate to host like 4 or 5 different charity events with different departments, different teams. And they got really involved. And by doing so, we were able to provide like thousands of meals to charitable organizations around the DFW area. And these are benefiting, folks that are not necessarily homeless, right? The hunger problem that's in the DFW area is there's only 12% of the hunger problem that's represented by people that are homeless. So 78% of the people that go home hungry every single night actually have a home and actually have a job, right? And so these resources go to these people. But all I had to do is just say it, right? And all I had to, I had a boss that actually cared about something that I cared about. And when he leaned into that, we were able to share that benefit with our community. So I think you do have to pay attention to the things that your employees really care about, and again, acknowledging that it might not be your thing, but it could be something that you at least help promote. And to this day, like I have a much stronger loyalty and an affinity for my boss, obviously, that kind of enabled that, because it allows us to have some level of commonality and connection. So it allows that you to be personal, as Jared talked about, even in the workplace.
And that was a genuine interest from your boss. It wasn't just another survey that they send around and
Not at all.
doesn't result in any real action.
Yeah, I told him he was kind of trolling my Facebook page, but that was fine. I mean, but again, it's he cared, and I had posted a couple of things on LinkedIn, and that's how he really initially saw it. But he did have a genuine interest, and he was he had never done anything in particular for hunger, but he was curious about it. And I think that curiosity in your people and trying to establish something that is a little bit more personal versus just talking about the numbers or what you're doing at work sometimes can go a long way with opening the door to the dialogue that Adina even talked about. And it gives you the opportunity sometimes to have some conversations out of the office that kind of allow you to open up a little bit more and even discuss some tough topics. But if you can have great conversations and you can have some commonality, I think it makes some of the tough conversations a little bit easier, because you've at least created that safe environment to do so.
Yeah, if I may jump in too, Dion, to that point, there was a question in the chat around like, what does it mean to bring your whole self? And that's a great example of that, our passions don't stop when we clock in. I think that, for me, whole selves has shown up in a number of ways. One that's particularly funny for me is now that we're working remote here at home, me and my wife says, y'all have a lot of conversations that don't have anything to do with ultimately what your meeting is about. And so like, we always start our Monday morning meetings with tell me the most exciting thing that happened in your weekend. And that may take 10, it may take 30 minutes, but it certainly is an important agenda item that allows for space to open up about storytelling, about things that would never happen if, me as a leader were planning the agenda item without that kind of question. And so it's really about like, not only getting straight to business in the meeting, but actually creating spaces where we can tell stories around, how we're showing up. So one of the tools we use is like checking in, like, how are you feeling today? And, I've stopped some meetings that were meant for ideation because, some of my colleagues were like, I'm just not feeling it today, and here's why, right? Had I never created that space, I would have been forcing an ideation space with someone who was nowhere near the ideation space to really perform. And because we created that space for her to tell her stories around the challenges that she was facing at home, we had opportunities to build stronger relationships, to rally as an organization around the lived experiences that she was facing. And ultimately it created just a whole nother level of culture that, in rain, sleet, or sunshine, that we're in this service together, and it is paid off in so many ways outside of that. So that's just another example of whole self. It's just really creating space for people to bring even those most personal thoughts and passions into the workspace to ultimately elevate the workspace.
Adina, you said these weren't one-time conversations. So
No.
how much time are we going to spend on all this? Because I got work to do. So what does it really look like to have a culture like this?
Well, I mean, I think once we've been doing it for a long time, like Jared was saying, it's just part of his culture already. Yeah, it's become part of the culture, and Dion's saying it's becoming part of the culture. So the more conversations we have, it's not about always carving a time in the agenda to say, okay, from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we are going to have this conversation. Now, some organizations, that might be how it starts, or that might be where it goes. But in the long run, that's not where it's always going to be. And it's going to become a cultural shift. The hope is that it becomes a cultural shift, and it's natural. And Jared was talking about doing check-ins. I do check-ins all the time. And sometimes check-ins change the agenda, and which is a little hard for me because I'm a tasky person sometimes. But however, I have learned that the mental health of people that I'm working with is much more important than my taskiness. And I give it, I think, a really potential example of this, and I think it was for me also, and also later on. So 2 years ago, when the Pittsburgh shooting happened, for those of you who don't know, I'm Jewish. It's one of my identities. When the Pittsburgh shooting happened in the synagogue, my life was kind of changed in a way that I hadn't expected. And those of people who knew that I was Jewish had an understanding in some capacity that I might need, I might need a moment. I might need more than a moment. Those individuals who did not have that understanding went around as life was normal. And so I was experiencing that 2 years ago. I experienced that again on a more national level, also after George Floyd's murder. That some organizations, luckily not mine, but some organizations that I've talked to people, they went around as if nothing happened, life was usual. And for any individual, myself included, also after George Floyd, who needed more than a moment, weren't unable to have those kind of moments. And so we are living in a world where our personal lives, what's going on in the national life impact us in so many different ways, that if we're not having conversations to support one another through our individual challenges and our challenges related to identity, it's going to be hard to function. And in the long run, if I was in an organization, and I'll be really personal about this, if I was in an organization that didn't understand that, I'd be looking for a different organization.
Absolutely, I echo that.
So you mentioned George Floyd and all that's happened subsequent to that, and there was a lot of debate in the country, and it was real easy for and still is, I'm sure, for us to step on one another's toes in having those conversations. So how do you prepare, if we want to have this conversation in our workplace, how do you prepare for conflict? I mean, there are people who are in specific groups who completely, go against what our own, what the meta type is for, a black man in America. And there are people who just reject that identity. Maybe who, one of their characteristics, but they say just having this conversation does not define me. So I don't even want to go there. Or somebody feels that, I see where this conversation is going because of their past experiences, and they don't want to go there because it's next thing I know, I'm going to be, told I'm somebody that I know I'm not. So how do we prepare for those conflicts and as we have these conversations?
So are you asking about like not telling people they're racist? Is that what?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not. Yeah. That's a good example.
I didn't know if that was a coded kind of thing.
I think we have to, I think a part of that's defining terms too, because.
Right. So there's lots of different things. And I'm a proponent of not making everybody be part of this conversation, especially when we start it, and allowing people to opt in as starting as the beginning of that culture. I'm also believe that it's helpful to define terms a little bit. And I say that from an experience of, I spent a while when I moved to Texas. You think I just moved to Texas? I've been here for a while. I spent a while realizing that other people's terms of definition of racism was not the definition of racism that I had. And we would argue and dialogue and have conflict because we didn't understand each other's definitions of racism. So having some type of working definitions is really helpful. But even before doing that, I think it's also helpful to figure out the ways you're going to be together. And so some people call that norms, some people call that ground rules, some people call it creating a safe space. Christy Clemens did a lot of research, and I can drop a little bit of that in the chat about how safe spaces is not always the best term to use, but has flipped to the idea of brave spaces. And so that's something that our organization talks about, is of creating a brave space where people hopefully are able to be open and honest about their personal life experiences, is another way to potentially start those conversations too.
Yeah,
I would
Dina.
jump in. Oh, please, Dion, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think you mentioned a few things that we have used at Elevate, and I think that they are very successful tools. One is you talked about the concept of opting in, but before I go there, I'll tell you my CEO was very humble when he talked to me about approaching some of the topics like George Floyd and even Black Lives Matters for that matter. And he said to me, he said, I'm just a redhead white kid from Fort Worth who literally knows nothing about this topic. And he said, I'm not even going to pretend that I understand. And he said, and I know that I'm probably asking you just because I know that you're a Black guy. He said, but I feel like you're probably closer to being able to understand and talk to these topics a little bit, but I need you to be honest with me about, the things that I say, the things that I do, and help me with kind of catering that. And I think that humility, I mean, we had a long conversation and exchange about that, which I think ended up turning into him empowering me to have listening sessions with our employees to talk about the topic more directly. Because one of the things I said to him was, I said, look, I'm definitely a Black guy, but I'm a country kid also from North Carolina. And a lot of these topics or issues have happened in the inner city. And I don't know that I necessarily have enough experience to really talk to them, right? But I can tell you that I'm not afraid to engage in the conversation. So can I have the conversation, right? And so he was very supportive of that. We ended up having listening sessions with our employees, which I think was an opportunity for the opt-in and the opportunity to create a brave space. I use that terminology, Adina. And we had people volunteer to come to several sessions. We had about 6 or 7 sessions that we did. And I would create about 3 or 4. I think I did anywhere from groups from 3 to 5 employees. And they were, different ethnicities, different genders, different sexual orientation, different religions for that matter, in each of these groups. And you got a lot of different perspectives. And I learned things about, what their perspectives were, in those sessions that even opened my mind, right? And I think what I tried to do in those sessions was to boil it down and not necessarily try to tell them, like, listen, we're not here to solve Black Lives Matters or the issues of Black Lives Matters. What we are here to do is talk about this concept of feeling excluded and whether or not we've created an environment where you feel excluded. Because I think every small business and even corporate entity has a unique opportunity to take humans that are all there for a single goal to uplift your business and to make your business profitable and show themselves and they're in the habit of working together. They're in the habit of collaborating. They're in the habit of communicating with each other in order to accomplish goals. And you have that uniqueness of kind of an inherent behavior that you can capitalize on to have these types of conversations and engage in it in a way that keeps it safe and keeps it, gives people an opportunity to speak openly about it. And we've been able to take some of those, some of the perspectives that our employees had, and really translate them into reminding, kind of a broader audience about the things that we were doing well, and reminding and even acknowledging to our employee base about the things that we want to do better, and talk to them about the steps that we're going to take in order to get there.
So talk to me about this listening session thing. Okay, so we get a small group, 3 to 5 people, you said, and how do you facilitate that? I mean, is it just, do you just drop a question and then see who responds, or what is, if we wanted to do that in a small organization, how would we do that?
The best advice that I got from one of my colleagues who actually facilitates these focus group meetings all the time, because we do, have the Center for a New Middle Class, which does focus group meetings and takes, information from customers all the time. And one of the best pieces of advice that he gave me is go into those conversations with the demeanor that you don't know, that you don't have an answer, and that you're seeking their expertise, you're seeking their counsel, you're seeking their perspectives on things. You have to humble yourself to ask questions. And a lot of times that's very difficult, because we all, especially, if any of you have held leadership positions, you're always, in the mode of trying to give an answer and trying to give a resolution, right? So I had to learn to stop myself from doing that and ask questions and shut up. The best thing I learned to do is to shut up and just to listen, and actively listen, and show that I'm actively listening by, repeating some of the things that people say, and maybe say it differently so that they can actually talk. But a small organization can absolutely do this. You come up with 3 very simple questions. My questions were, have you ever felt, tell me about a time that you felt excluded. Tell me about an accomplishment that you're very proud of. Tell me about how we at Elevate have allowed you to be successful. And then tell me how we here at Elevate have hindered your success, or made you feel excluded, or made you not be able to participate in a way that you feel like you could have. And that's how we had our conversation around exclusion. And you'll be surprised that even though they're 4 basic questions, the way that people answer those questions are very, very different. I can guarantee you that if you ask people in this in this audience or across the panel to answer either of those questions, you would really get different ways that people would answer that question. And that's what's important, is to be eager to collect all of that, in my terms, of data. It's really good people data to have, so that you can react and be able to understand exactly how to ensemble some of that information together and create a more people-oriented solution for them.
Yeah, I would love to jump in as well on that. We talk about brave spaces, and that's something that we've taken at Leadership IC and evolved into what we call braver spaces. The R being for isolating race. And so some of the questions that we ask are like, tell me about your earliest memory about race, or your most recent memory about race. I mean, we even use those sometimes as check-in questions, because there's things that happen in our society, in our country, around race that are both to be celebrated and also, unfortunately, are traumatic at times. And so checking in around that question allows for that conversation to be ongoing. As an organization, one of the things that we do is we create tools for these conversations, similar to agreements. And really it's the tools are designed to continue to create that braver space. And so we have tools to navigate conversations, to locate when you're going to be triggered, right? We all have our trigger points. And so it's important that we have tools and build our muscle on how to identify where we are when having tough conversations. We also have agreements that help us to lead better and to lead and facilitate those spaces. Each one of us can facilitate these kinds of conversations with those type of agreements. And then lastly, we have tools for when we're working on a project, how do we ultimately get to transformation? Well, it starts with us telling our stories and using those stories and listening also and seeking multiple perspectives. And the one piece that has been a challenge for us is power dynamics. And in organizations where there's titles and there's egos and all these other things, power dynamics can do a lot of harm on the culture of an organization. And so what we try to do as an organization is constantly check when are there moments or blind spots for my power to be experienced traumatically, and how do I like negotiate that with the person I'm interacting with ultimately to get the goal that we're trying to get to. And so I think it's really important, yes, for organizations and people to dive into these conversations. I think it's also important to recognize that in these conversations, there are very helpful tools that help us build our muscles. So for example, some of the tools we use, Courageous Conversations has a tool called the Racial Compass, which basically allows folks to check in where they're feeling, thinking, believing, or acting within a particular conversation. We also use a tool called the Racial Healing Handbook, which takes you through like several activities that help you explore how race has and hasn't showed up in your lived experience. And so those are just a few tools, but I think it's important, yes, to dive into the conversations, but also to lean on tools so that the conversation doesn't end in a flipping of a table, but that we lean into that discomfort and we're constantly building our muscle to have tougher and tougher conversations that ultimately lead to driving, positive outcomes and lead indicators in our business and in our organizations.
I warned you that this hour would go really fast, and
Yeah.
we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. But let me just throw one last question. If I'm an individual in an organization and I'm not necessarily leadership, but I want to have these conversations, or I've got this coworker who I want to express solidarity with, or whatever, there's a circumstance where I feel like, I want to say something. How would an individual go about starting one of these conversations in a way that doesn't, offend or, and the reality is, I think we don't live in Twitter. Everybody is ready to be offended and to be offended on social media, but in real world, people are much more gentle and sweet than in social media. But if I want to have that conversation and I've got liver quiver about it, and what might I do?
For me, this is something I use. I say, "Hi, my name is Jared. I'd like to have a conversation." That's something that's old fashioned a bit, but I think that it's just lean into the conversation. Hey, I don't know much about you and I'd love to learn your story. Can we set up a time to just talk, and I'll ask questions and learn more about you. I think we make the conversation a lot harder than it has to be, and it's because it's rooted in the histories that we bring to the conversation. And it's also the lived experiences that we bring to having conversations that we've all had within our families. I personally had conversations in my families where now I don't want to go back and have that conversation again because it was so bad. But I think that, this is a work of relationship building. And in relationship building, there's, hard times, there's down times, and there's also times to be celebrated. And I think that, initiating that conversation to build a relationship is so important. So that's the advice that I try to push myself into, and having tough conversations is this is the opportunity to take our relationship one step further.
Yeah, I think also, Mike, that you can don't be afraid to seek help.
Mm-hmm.
There are people in your organization or even outside of your organization that you admire and that you have a lot of respect for. If you see some qualities in them that they might be able to help you with engaging in that conversation with someone, then I say, seek that help. We have actually an interesting kind of concept at Elevate called the new hire buddy, where whenever we hire a new person, that person comes in, and for the first 90 days, you identify someone in your organization that you think exhibits the qualities that you admire and that you want that person, that new hire person to kind of emulate in some degree. And we go and we have a conversation with the new hire buddy, and we say, hey, listen, I have a new employee that's coming in. This is what, their resume looks like. This is what I'm hiring them for. And, here's some things that I learned about them during the interview process. And I'd love for you to be their new hire buddy because I would love for you to do this thing. This is what I admire about you. And this is what I don't understand about this person, or this is what I don't know about that person. And I'd love to, help get you to help me with better understanding that, and helping me to kind of make sure that I'm positioning this person in a way that they can grow and that they feel comfortable here. And that person then becomes an advocate for you, even with the person that you bring in. So when your employee starts, they usually stick with that person for at least like the first 90 days or so. And they usually have, touch points on a weekly basis. Whatever they agree upon, it's up to them. But you kind of check in with that new hire buddy and say, how things going, and want to make sure that that person feels comfortable here. If there's a tough conversation that they want to talk to their new hire buddy about in confidence, they can do that. But it's a way of kind of creating a way that you can build a relationship closer with your colleague that you admire, but also to allow your new employee to feel empowered because they know that they have some support when they come into your organization.
Dion, we do the same thing. We have what we call coaches across the organization, and even our CEO has a coach that's not the CEO. And so I really love that concept. It really works.
It does.
And Dion, when y'all are selecting these new hire buddies, you're not just selecting them based on demographics. So, okay, this new employee is a middle-aged Black female, so I'm gonna go find another one of those and hook them up. Oops, you're muted, Dion. Something happened there.
Sorry, no, it's really about the leadership qualities that you're looking for, right? It's about selecting someone who exhibits, the qualities that you see potential in your new employee, but you want to take them to the next level, right? It really means that you as a hiring manager take an opportunity to really dive deep into your interviews and understand what are the leadership qualities that show potential, but you'd like to get them to elevate those. No pun intended there. But it also gives you an opportunity to really, again, build a relationship with a colleague of yours and share something that you actually admire about them, speaking positively to them, so that they understand. Because there are people that I have worked with for years, and it's not until like their retirement or they decide to leave the company that I ever say, hey, you were a great at this, right? But I could have said that for years when I worked with them, right? But when you identify through this program, we've realized that we have an opportunity to kind of share some of our mutual respect and admiration for our colleagues. And I think it, again, helps to build relationships internally.
Well, thank you all for being on the panel. Thank you to Nettie especially, but and Leah and all the Fort Worth Chamber for making this possible. This is an ongoing thing, and I think we'll probably take December off, but we'll be back, I expect, in January to continue these kind of conversations. So thank y'all. Thank you for our friends on Zoom and our friends on Facebook. And I think we've all dropped our information into the chat, but we're out there. You can find us on LinkedIn or wherever else. So and I'm always up for lunch with strangers. So if you want to buy me lunch, I'll let you. So anyway, well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.